say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.
Up. You don't want to just have the Bible, you want to open it. You get a lot more out of it that way. Turn into Acts chapter 22. We are closing on in to the end of our study on the ministry of Paul as presented in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 22, there's 28 chapters, so we're moving quite along. Once again, as we get into this, you'll notice that God is working on both ends. You see this over and over and over. It's the way He works. And we don't always realize it, but what's going on in our life today, He's already working on something that we're getting ready for in the days ahead. Now, if you remember, I know you do, but I'll kind of go over it briefly. In the last chapter, because this is kind of a continuation of the last chapter. Remember, Paul was in the synagogue, and when he was in there in the temple, and they got angry with him, and they grabbed him, they threw him out of the temple. That wasn't good enough. They closed the door behind him. Then they started whooping up on him in the street. And so the Roman guard, they're not going to have any rights or anything. That's not going to happen. And so they came charging in, and of course immediately they quit beating on him, but the guards and everything, they grabbed him, and they were taking him away. And while they were taking him away, everybody was hollering. All these Jews that wanted Paul gone, they were screaming at him, to take him away and all of this kind of stuff. And so they chained him up first, and they started dragging him in to take him away. But as they were taking him into the barracks, Paul asked a question. He did it in the Greek language, which was interesting, because the ones that caught him probably thinking, he's just a criminal, no education or anything like that. But he spoke in the Greek language, which the sergeant of the guard, he understood, kind of shocked him. And so he stopped. He listened to what Paul said, and Paul asked a question. He said, "Can I speak to the crowd?" Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Just speaking for Jim Osteen, if a bunch of people out there, if y'all start beating up on me and someone's taking me away, I'm not going to ask them to let me come and talk to you. I don't think I would want to do that. But Paul, he loves these people. He understood them, and he wanted to share the gospel message. And so he said, "Let me address them." And so the sergeant of the guard says, "Okay," and everything. And that's where we are here. And so at the last verses there, the last chapter, it says that they took Paul, and Paul raised his hands to get their attention. So we know he wasn't, his arms weren't strapped to his side, but it did say they had some chains on him. But he lifted the hand, and so all of the people now are waiting to hear what Paul is going to have to say. That's where we are when we pick up here in this chapter. Notice in the first couple of verses there, look at verse 1 there in chapter 2. "Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now." And when they heard that he spoke to them in what language? In their language, Hebrew, they kept silent the more. What did he call them? When Paul spoke to them, he said, "You bunch of bullies." Is that what he said? No, brethren, fathers, father of the faith. Brethren, that means we're one together. We're brethren, brothers and sisters in Christ. You see, even though they are treating Paul the way they are treating him, he's still showing respect. It's not always easy to do that. But when we disagree and everything, we should always try to speak in respect and everything like that. And it says in verse 2, he spoke in the Hebrew language there. And as a result, now he is speaking their language. Now they are going to listen more intently to what he has to say. Now, Paul starts giving them, and I hope you have one. Paul starts giving them his before and after story. Do you have one? He has his before story, part of the story, before he met Christ, and then he's got the after part, after he met Christ. And in the middle, he has the changing event. Before story. You turn the commercials on. You turn these TV commercials on, and there's your before and after stories. It shows somebody, humongous like I am, and this is Jim Osteen before he does this pill or does this. And then over here, I'm a little skinny dude over here. This is Jim after he has this pill, this medicine. Or they show, their clothes before detergent, so-and-so with XYZ bleach in it or whatever. Now we see it after. That's the before and after. And that's what we're seeing here in everything. You need to have a before and after story. But your life before Christ, your life after Christ. I accepted Christ at 9 years old. And I was basically a good kid, but I was as mischievous as you could be and everything. But even though you accept Christ young, I have a before story and everything. So now, verses 3 to 5, and look at verse 3. He starts actually getting into the before story. He was born what? A Jew. There in Tarsus, grew up in Jerusalem, highly educated as anybody, and he understands where they are coming from. He understands how they felt. He has been one of them. He was just like them, so he understands. All of this is the before story, and they're listening. They're starting to identify with Paul. He's bringing them in, trying to bring them in, so now he can share the gospel and everything. Look in verse 4. What was he doing? What would he do? Verse 4 there. Yeah, persecution. He would go and he would bind Christians. Yay, you. They're excited when he talks. I was the one that was going out and binding the Christians here. Verse 5, he said, I had received permission from the elders. And by the way, some of these elders may very well have been in the crowd. It's possible that some of the elders that he'd gotten permission from may have been in this crowd, but I had gotten permission from the elders so that I could go to the Damascus to persecute them. I could go get them, put them in chains, and bring them back. He is an outstanding example. That's what he's telling them. He said, I'm an outstanding example of the Jewish devotion as they thought it ought to be. Now we get to the changing event. This is what caused him to come and know Christ. Paul tells of this. His experience on the Damascus Road, he never got tired of telling it. I'd say this all the time. Paul, you know what Paul's favorite hymn would be if he was living today? I love to tell the story. And the Old Baptist Hymnal, it's page 141. I remember from those days years and years ago. But he loved telling this story and recalling it, and that's what he starts doing here. He was on his way to arrest Christians, but he got arrested by Christ. Look at verse 6. What came down from heaven? What did he see? Yeah, bright light. Y'all know this story. We went through it in detail back in chapter 9. When it happened, he now has their attention. They're listening to him. Big crowd, and everybody's quiet. Everybody's quiet, hanging on to every word. And he says, all of a sudden, and because this was a dramatic thing in Paul's life, I think a lot of emotions was coming out when he was telling this story. He said, and then this bright light began to shine down. He has their attention. They're picturing this. They are familiar with the Damascus Road. They may have been wondering what part of the road where he was. Verse 7. He said that he fell to the ground when the light came, and he heard a voice from heaven. What did the voice say? Yeah, why are you persecuting me? And of course the reason, we went into detail before, whenever we're persecuting another Christian, anybody else, if we are hurting someone else, it's hurting Christ. We know that from Matthew 25. Look at verse 8. I believe you could hear a pin drop at this point. And the voice identified himself. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. They would know who Jesus was. Now, they didn't believe that he was the Messiah. That's a lot of the problem they were having with Paul. But you see, he was dazed. He was smitten to the ground by the brightness of this light that was shining upon him. And when this light burst from heaven and came down upon him and blinded him, the Lord spoke to him. And so Paul, the persecutor, is now face to face with deity. Paul realized what was happening. He was convicted right here and there. I think this is actually the saving moment in Paul's life. But I believe he was convicted right here of the truth of the gospel that he despised. He hated the gospel. He despised it. That's why he was going after all these Christians. But he came face to face with the fact that Jesus was Christ and Lord, and that Jesus was the promised Messiah that they had been looking for. And he had risen from the dead, and he had ascended into heaven. And I believe that was the moment Paul recognized him as Lord, trusted him as his Lord and Savior, and I believe then he passed from unbelief into genuine faith in Christ. And he was changed at that point from this persecutor into a Christian who was sharing the message. You see, he passed from a state of condemnation, Romans 8:1. He went from condemnation to salvation and security. What a moment, that had to be in his life. Now, was your salvation experience that dramatic? Yours wasn't? I thought everybody's was. Mine wasn't. It was dramatic to me, but mine wasn't nothing like that. But understand, I've heard people actually come and say, they kind of felt guilty. They said, well, mine, I didn't have anything happen to me like that. Am I saved? That didn't happen to me. I couldn't tell you, I've done well over 100 weddings. I've married people in a big church with everything you could do. One woman grabbed me before at rehearsal night. She got hold of me, and she pulled me off to the side, and she said, now, Pastor, I want you to understand something. I went to a wedding a few weeks ago, and it was over in 20 minutes. I am paying too much money for this dress, for her to wear it a few minutes, and then be over. It had better last. I put everything in that wedding that I could put in that wedding. She also got mad because the preacher's sleeves, his sleeves didn't come a little bit below his coat, and all of this stuff. Man, I have been in weddings like that. I've been on the beach. I did it in Florida on the beach during the middle of July. I've done them on docks. I've done them in houses. I've done weddings all over the place. I did it during the invitation. Couple came forward during the invitation. It was planned. They walked the aisle. They'd been married. They'd lost their mates, and they were on up in years, and so they're about 80 years old. And they came down, and they sat on the front pew during the invitation. And then I had to close in prayer and dismiss. Then they just stood up in front of me, and I said, do you take her? And I started the wedding, and we did it right there. But let me ask you a question. Which one was the most married? The fancy one? Or just standing in front of the preacher? Saying, once we took our signature and we signed that wedding certificate, they're married just as much as anyone else. Your salvation experience may not have been as dramatic, and that's okay. Actually, it may be good in some ways because you weren't in the mess that Paul may have been in, but you are just as saved as they are. Look in verse 10, if you will, and look down there. Paul asked a question. All this is taking place. He recognized, Jesus for who he was, and so he turns around, and I love the question. It's one of those great questions that you have in the Scriptures. What's the question? You ever ask that to the Lord? Every day. You ought to ask him every single day. He knew who he was dealing with, and so he wanted to know what to do. And what was the answer? Yeah. Yeah. Look at what the Lord says. It's kind of interesting what He says. He said, okay, this is what you do. I want you to rise and go to Damascus. After you go to Damascus, you're going to go on your first missionary journey. Then you're going to go on 2 more missionary journeys. Then you're going to make a trip to Rome. Did He do all that? What did He say? Go to Damascus. That's it. He step by step by step. That's faith. I don't have to. He's not going to give us the whole story. That takes faith away. But and so notice what Paul does in verse 11. Did he go? He went. He just trusted the Lord and he went. But who helped Paul? Yeah. Why did Paul have to have help getting there? He's blind. So they had to take him. Then when he gets there, in verses 12, it picks up, Ananias comes on the scene. Again, by Ananias being the one to come and help him, he would know more about what's going on. He could explain things to Paul and help Paul out here. But look at verse 12. It says, good testimony among all the Jews. He was devoted, to the law, and the Jews knew him to be a good man. This is going to help Paul by becoming identified with one of the fellow Jews. God had already prepared Ananias, but before this was going on, so that he would be able to come and be with Paul. Verse 13, he recovers his sight. Verse 16, he's baptized. Verse 15, he's now preaching the gospel that he was trying to destroy. Changed life, proof of salvation. Some things I can't prove. I cannot prove that I'm an electrician. I cannot prove that I'm a doghouse builder. I tried to prove that. My wife can tell you it didn't go very well. I could do it now, but my first time wasn't good. But your testimony, a changed life, we see that it's really real what's going on. Okay, 17. Paul goes back to Jerusalem following his conversion, but while he is praying in the temple, the Lord gives him some advice. What's the Lord telling him to do? On down verse 18, it picks up what he was told to do in verse 18. Yeah, get out of town. Why? They're coming to get him. They're coming to get him, and he needs to get out of town. Now, he's got a choice to do. He can leave or he doesn't leave. What do you think is the best thing for him to do? The best thing is to get out of town. That's what we got to learn to do, is follow the direction of the Lord and everything. But they will not receive his words. That's what he's told. They're not going to receive you. And how fast is he to get out of town? Quickly. They're coming after him. Now, I love his response. I'm going to read these 2 verses 19 and 20 here. So I said, Lord, and remember he's sharing this with all the people. He says, so Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed on you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by consenting to his death and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Now, I think Paul thought at this point, they're listening to him, they're being good to him at this point. He may have had an inkling, Lord had laid this on his heart, that they're going to believe everything that he's saying. And they're going to jump on board. But verse 21, what does Paul say next? Oh, did you use that dirty word? Did I hear a dirty word? Gentiles. That was a dirty word to them. And there again we see, you say that thing, and as soon as you say something, or as soon as you do something, may not have been the best thing, but he told them in verse 22. Now this is comical in some ways. In verse 22, how did they react? My definition of what happened when you read that whole thing there, they went nuts. They really kind of lost it here and everything. They had the idea that they have a lock on God's love. It's all for them and nobody else. But look in verse 23. What are these guys doing? When they got angry at Paul, what did they start doing? How would you like to be there? I see it being sunny. Now, I don't know what the temperature was, but I kind of picture it, being hot and everything and sweaty and all. And they start ripping their clothes, and you throw the sand and dirt up in the air. Some of it's going to come back down. You ever get sand and dirt all over you? Especially if you're sweaty and messy. It doesn't feel good and everything like that. I try to picture that. I try to picture that scene, and I see them throwing all this stuff in the air, and this must have been so ridiculous looking and everything. Remember, the guards, the Roman troops, they're still there. Look at those bunch of idiots. You know what they must have been thinking when they saw it. You see, that it was common. They would, you shout. To show your disapproval. You would wave garments, tear your garments if it was really bad, and you would throw dirt in the air. That was kind of a normal thing. I wouldn't have wanted to have been there. I've got a problem. I have a slow blink, and it's caused me problems. At least that's what the doctor told me it was, that I had a slow blink, and things get my eye easy. I've had to go in and have stuff cut out and stuff my eye before, but I just the thought of being in that with all that dust and dirt and everything going up in the air, would have been pretty bad. So in verse 24, what does the chief captain do? Here we see, it's not going to happen on his watch. It is not going to happen on his watch. There will not be a riot. And remember, these are Roman soldiers. They have strict orders. If the crowds get out of hand, you do whatever's necessary to stop it. Not like today. With what happens, and we go nuts when someone gets hurt. I mean, they come out with swords flashing, and do whatever they need to put an end to the riot and everything. And so that they grab Paul. And they're going to have to take him away. And they take him inside. Captain wants to know what's going on. I don't know if he spoke Hebrew or not. I know he spoke Greek. Whether or not he spoke the common language of the people, because he may have been brought in when Roman came in and conquered everything. So I don't know what language, if he spoke this Hebrew, but one thing he knew, Paul just said something that really got him upset. So he said, I got to get to the bottom of this. And so he takes Paul there, verse 24, 25. He takes Paul, he brings him in. He said, a good scourging, we'll find out what's going on. You see, that's a good way to get to the truth or to get a confession. Now, when you start beating somebody, when you take these leather straps and you start beating somebody with the bone in the end of it and ripping their flesh, I mean, look in verse 25. It said they were binding him with the leather strips and everything. When they did that, they always stretched you. They didn't just tie their hands to a post like this. I mean, they would make you bend because they want that back nice and tight. The skin tight, the muscles tight, so that when those straps hit you, it would just rip and tear the flesh and the muscle. It's a good way to get a confession. A lot of people would confess anything just to stop it. And so that is what's getting ready to happen. Now, I love this verse. And I love the way God is always working on both ends and before it ever happens. Paul asked a simple question. Now, I picture them. They grab him. You have all this racket going still outside, the people screaming and hollering. They've drug him in. They're getting ready to give him this big beating. And they take him and they're starting to strap him to the post. Whoever's going to swing the straps, getting ready, probably getting it ready, so that he can start giving him the scourging. And Paul, I think, said in a very calm voice, what was the question? Yeah, can you beat a Roman citizen? Paul is being mistreated all the way around. I mean, every way, back and forth. The Jews had thought back in chapter 21, one of the things they were after him for, they thought in the previous chapter that Paul had brought Trophimus, a Gentile, in the temple, which he didn't do. And the centurion, he didn't know that Paul was a Roman citizen. And because he's a Roman citizen, you cannot do this. If someone's not a Roman citizen, you can take them, you can arrest them, you can beat them, you can do just about anything you want to them. If you are a Roman citizen, though, you cannot be touched. You can be arrested. You can be have chains on so you can't get away. You can be locked up in a jail, but no punishment. You cannot be beaten, you cannot be executed, cannot be mistreated until you are convicted of the crime. After you're convicted, then if the sentence is a beating or execution, then it can happen, but it hasn't happened yet. He hasn't gone to trial. Now, somewhere along the line, Paul is a full-blooded Jew, born a Jew. Somewhere along the line, the best we know from history and everything, Paul's father, because it says he was born a citizen. Somewhere, Paul's father undoubtedly had done something for the Roman government. Just like you serve in the American military. We have a lot of people. They'll come serve so many years in our military, and they get to become an American citizen, for doing that. Paul's dad had undoubtedly had done something for the Roman government and had been given full citizenship. So now when Paul is born, he is born as a Roman citizen. He's also a full-blooded Jew, which really makes things interesting here. And so the question is asked. Look in verse 26. What does the centurion do when he hears the question? He didn't waste any time. He didn't waste any time. He went and told the commander, top dog there, said, some of you might want to know about this guy. Before we go any further, he's a Roman citizen. Verse 27, what does the chief captain do? He didn't waste any time. He goes and he checks on it himself. He goes to see whether or not it is true. Because here's what's going to happen to him. If they had gone ahead and they had scourged Paul, what's going to happen to them? They will get the scourging themselves, or they will be executed. They could actually, if they were real harsh, he could have been executed because he ordered this to happen to a Roman citizen. So he's wanting to find out before anything else happened what's happening here. And so I love the question that he asked in verse 28. So the chief captain, he didn't send somebody, he went himself. He wants to talk to Paul himself and find out exactly what's going on. And so the chief captain comes. He's wanting to know about Paul's citizenship, but the first thing he says, he tells how he became a Roman. How did he get it? I think it's 28. Yeah, he purchased it. He bought his citizenship, and that was done. Kings wanting to make money and everything. You want to be a citizen? Yeah, give me $1,000 and you're a citizen. Okay, now he's a citizen. And so that's how, and so he asked Paul, he said, I got mine by purchasing it. How did you get yours? Natural born, which puts Paul's on a higher level than his. He is in serious trouble. Paul is a natural born Roman citizen. Good chance he gets death if he touches him. Now, it hadn't happened yet. It just came close. So, look in verse 29. How is the captain feeling when you look at those next two verses, 29 and 30? How's the captain feeling right now? Would you be? Yeah. Sometimes we rush into something. I tell people all the time, I say, slow down. Something happens. And it's a tendency. Let's don't waste time. Let's go get it done. That's my nature. But at the same time, I said, well, let's wait a minute. Let's just, exactly what's happening. Well, you got to find out. And so he's afraid. Look at 29. They removed the restraints that Paul had on him. They probably, I'm guessing, they kept him in jail. Probably fed him well that night, while he's awaiting trial. They could keep him there, treat him good, feed him well, but they're not going to do anything else. The next day, verse 30, the next day the chief captain is going to take Paul to the Sanhedrin, that's the Jewish council, so that a formal charge can be placed against Paul. Then, once that charge is made, they can try him, and then they can go from there after they get the results of the trial. Let me ask you a question as this closes. Do you think it was just a coincidence that Paul's dad became a Roman citizen? I don't know how long Paul's dad had been a Roman citizen before Paul was born. But you see, God had a plan. And so way back here, I need Paul's father to be a Roman citizen. So he set it up, because this is going to help Paul 2 or 3 more times. In these last, few chapters we have left, it's going to help Paul, this fact alone right here. But it was all part of God's plan. He's working in your life. I don't know what he's doing in mine right now for next week. I look back and I say, wow, at all the things that God was doing, and I didn't realize it, to put Lily and I together and to put us here, and all this. But God's working in your life. Don't ever think he's not. We'll go on and we'll see what happened, because it really picks up. I love this next chapter. There's some things happening. It's really one of my favorite chapters in this one, in the book, when we get to the next one. Any comments before we close? Matt, you can come on and lead us in our prayer time. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for listening. Go ahead, be reading ahead, and that we'll be ready to go next week. Brother Matt.
We need to pray for Miss Rose Balls. She was put in the hospital sometime either late Friday or either early Saturday, and they thought she had a blockage and stuff. But anyhow, went to go see her Sunday, and they had her on an Ativan or something like that. And she was just talking all kind of crazy stuff. But anyhow, Amanda called me today and said that they got Gerald and Jane coming to make a decision to let the hospice come in and take over. Said she's not doing well at all, so if you would pray for Miss Rose and Gerald, Jane, and especially Amanda. She's just total to pieces. So anyhow, if y'all would pray for Miss Rose and her family. Continue to pray for the pastor search committee as we seek God's will for a pastor for our church. And also pray for the Constitution and Bylaw Committee. Hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll be meeting, I think, 25th of January, I think. And we'll be meeting to put together the Constitution and bylaws and stuff. Any other prayer requests? Yeah, got the men's ministry meeting at Pine Level tomorrow night. That'll be at 7 o'clock at Pine Level. Ronnie mentioned yesterday morning in the prayer group for Arthur Cooler, not Arthur Stewart. Anyhow, he needs our prayers. He will have some surgery done. And Pat and Calvin's got a praise report. Jared had issues with his knee, and they got the fluid and stuff off, and the doctors has released him, so he's got a praise report on that. Anything else? I don't know anything. Anybody know anything about Keith and Joyce? All right, but we do remember Keith with doing dialysis, and Lord was back in church Sunday, so that's a good day to see him back in church. He's really had a round with whatever he's dealing with. So no more prayers. Timmy, you lead us in prayer. You lead us in prayer, Timmy.